Paris, 1944. The city was suffocating under the weight of war. Smoke billowed from ruined buildings, and shadows stretched long across abandoned alleyways. But in one house on Rue Le Sourd, the darkness was not just from war, it was something much worse. Inspector Georges-Victor Massou had seen death before. The war had made sure of that. But when he entered the three-story townhouse, a stench so putrid clawed at his throat. The air was thick, heavy with something sickly sweet. Something burned. Massou's men moved cautiously, their boots scraping against the blood-stained wooden floor. Then they saw it, the furnace roaring with unnatural heat. And inside, bone fragments. Flesh blackened and curling against the fire's edge. A pile of human remains lay discarded, carelessly tossed in bags, limbs protruding at unnatural angles. The house was a slaughterhouse. Yet there was no sign of the man who owned it, Dr. Marcel Petiot, a respected physician. A war hero, some said. Others whispered rumors that he had a way to help people escape Nazi-occupied France. That for a price, he could make you disappear to safety. But now, it seemed those who had disappeared had never left the house at all. Months earlier, few would have suspected Dr. Petiot of anything sinister. He was a man of great intellect, known for his eccentricity but also his charm. He had treated patients for years, earning their trust. And during the war, when hope was a dwindling ember, he presented himself as a savior. To those desperate to flee Nazi persecution, he offered salvation. A secret network, he claimed, an escape route to Argentina. All they needed was money and the required vaccination before their journey. The injections were given quickly. Victims never felt the second needle puncture their skin. Cyanide worked fast. Bodies vanished. Some dissolved in vats of quicklime. Others were burned. The money? Pocketed. As the war pressed on, his appetite grew. The sheer number of victims became unmanageable. The incinerator roared day and night. Neighbors complained about the smell, but Petiot had answers ready. The Germans, he said, I am ridding the city of traitors. Most believed him, until the stench became unbearable. When authorities finally breached the house, they found the remnants of his gruesome work. Personal belongings of those who had come seeking help. Then came the biggest shock. Journals. Records meticulously kept, each detailing transactions, names, and dates. Petiot had documented his crimes, as if cataloging inventory. But he was gone. For months, Paris was haunted by whispers of Dr. Satan, as the press called him. Was he in hiding? Was he still killing? Then, in October 1944, a tip came in. A disheveled man, bearded and thin, was seen loitering near a train station. A former patient recognized him. Massou didn't hesitate. When they cornered him, Petiot simply smiled. Ah, gentlemen, you found me. What came next would shock even the most hardened of investigators. The moment Marcel Petiot was cornered in the Paris train station, a wave of disbelief rippled through the officers who had tracked him down. His appearance was ragged, a far cry from the clean-cut doctor they had once known. His eyes, however, gleamed with a terrifying calmness, as if he had anticipated this moment. He smiled, a chilling, unsettling expression, as they approached. You found me, Petiot said, his voice strangely serene for a man who had been evading capture for so long. The officers hesitated for a brief moment, then quickly moved in to detain him. But it was clear, Petiot wasn't worried. He didn't resist arrest. Instead, he calmly sat on the station bench, waiting for them to handcuff him. As they secured his arms, the officers exchanged uneasy glances, each of them wondering if they were truly capturing the man responsible for dozens, if not hundreds, of deaths. Petiot's nonchalance only deepened the mystery. Was he merely a man who had snapped, or was there something far more sinister hidden beneath the mask? As he was transported back to the police station, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Inspector Massou couldn't shake the eerie sense of calm that surrounded the doctor. He had anticipated a desperate fugitive, someone who would plead for mercy or attempt an escape. But instead, they were met with a man who walked toward his fate with chilling composure. At the station, Petiot was placed in a small interrogation room, and Massou took the lead, his voice cold and steady. "Dr. Petiot, we know what you've done. You've been killing innocent people, refugees, resistance fighters, and the very souls you promised to save. Tell us why." Petiot simply leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as if savoring the moment. "You think I killed them because of money or madness? How quaint." Massu's jaw clenched. This was not the answer he had expected. But Petiot continued, almost as if he were lecturing a student. "You see," he said, "it's all a matter of perspective. You've been chasing a murderer, but the truth is, I was simply cleansing the world of weakness. The war, this war, has shown me one thing above all: the strong survive and the weak perish." Massu felt a chill at Petiot's words. They were not those of a man who was desperate or unhinged. They were the words of someone who believed, deeply, that they were in the right, that they were doing something far greater than murder. Petiot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "I gave them what they wanted, an escape, a chance to live, to be free. All I did was offer them a solution they couldn't resist." It wasn't until later that Massu would learn the full extent of Petiot's delusion. The doctor had seen himself as some kind of savior, a higher being offering mercy to the desperate. But his twisted interpretation of mercy had led to a string of gruesome murders. Each victim, each life taken, had been meticulously planned. Petiot had convinced his clients, mostly Jews, political fugitives, and those running from the Nazis, that he could help them escape to Argentina, charging them a small fortune for the privilege. Instead, he had used cyanide injections to kill them, their bodies discarded in vats of quicklime or burned in his furnace. The valuables they had brought with them were stolen, their bodies disposed of with such efficiency that no one had noticed they were gone. But it wasn't just the murder that shocked the authorities, it was his audacity. Petiot had operated under the guise of a medical professional, gaining the trust of countless people who never suspected his dark intentions. He had used the war, the chaos, as a cover for his killing spree. But now, with his capture, the veil was being lifted. In the coming days, Massu and his team scoured Petiot's former residence, the house on Rue Le Sueur. The scene they discovered was beyond anything they could have imagined. Limbs, charred and dismembered, were scattered throughout the property. Personal items, jewelry, documents, even photographs, lined the shelves like trophies. Then came the journals. Petiot had kept meticulous records of his crimes, as if cataloging the lives he had taken. Names, dates, and amounts paid for his supposed services filled page after page. There were hundreds of entries, each one marking a life snuffed out, a victim lost. Yet, as they pored through the journals, they realized something disturbing. Petiot's final entry had been made just a few days before his capture. There was no mention of his escape, no sign that he was planning to flee. The last words he wrote were simply, "The hunt is almost over." It was as if Petiot had been leading the authorities toward this moment all along, orchestrating his own downfall with a disturbing precision. He wasn't running from justice, he was playing a game. But what Massa didn't know was that the true horror was only beginning. As the days passed and the investigation into Petiot's crimes deepened, another layer of his story began to unravel. Witnesses came forward, describing how Petiot had been in contact with high-ranking officials during the war. Some even suggested that his work with the resistance, his supposed escape network, had been more than a mere facade. Could he have been working for someone else? Was there a larger conspiracy at play? The more they dug, the more questions surfaced. And then, in a shocking twist, Massu received an anonymous tip. Someone had seen Petiot meeting with members of the Gestapo before his capture. Was Petiot just a pawn in a much larger game? Massu couldn't ignore the feeling that he was only scratching the surface of a much darker truth. Was Petiot truly the mastermind behind his killing spree, or was he just a puppet in the hands of more powerful forces? The answers lay hidden in the ashes of his former life, and Massu knew that the investigation had only just begun. But as he delved deeper into Petiot's twisted web, he began to realize that some mysteries were too dangerous to uncover. And just when Massa thought he had reached the end, something even more chilling surfaced, a series of coded messages hidden within Petiot's journals. As he worked feverishly to decode them, one line stood out among the rest. The true plan is still in motion. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. Petiot had been working towards something far bigger than anyone had anticipated, and whatever it was, Masu had to stop it. Masu's heart raced as the words on Petiot's final journal entry gnawed at his mind. The true plan is still in motion. The cryptic line weighed heavily, as if some greater, more sinister scheme was unfolding right before his eyes. Petiot had been captured, his reign of terror exposed. And yet, in the face of his undeniable guilt, the French detective could not shake the feeling that he had been played by the very man he thought he understood. Petiot had always been a man of contradictions. Publicly, he had been a doctor of impeccable reputation, trusted by his patients and lauded as a compassionate professional. Yet, beneath that facade had lurked the mind of a killer who now claimed that his actions were part of a greater plan, a plan that stretched beyond anything Masu had imagined. The coded messages Petiot had hidden in his journals were the key. They weren't just ramblings, they were deliberate, calculated instructions. Petiot had been meticulous, as if preparing for something monumental. And now that Masu had cracked the first code, he couldn't help but feel that he had uncovered a fraction of the truth. Something much larger, more dangerous, and more terrifying was at stake. The decoded message read, "The next phase begins soon. There are others who believe in my vision. We will create a world of purity. They will help me. No one can stop us." Petiot had been working for someone. Masu felt it in his gut. This was bigger than a single man's lust for power. This was the movement of something insidious, a belief system that had taken root in the minds of many. Petiot wasn't just an isolated predator. He was part of a dangerous ideology, one that could spread like wildfire if left unchecked. Masu shared the discovery with his team, but the more they discussed it, the more they realized they were trapped in a deadly race against time. Petiot had already worked with Nazi collaborators. Who were these others mentioned in the code? Were they still out there, waiting to carry out his twisted vision? For days, Masu obsessed over the journal entries. Every lead seemed to slip further into darkness. Each new clue was another dead end or a piece of an even more elaborate puzzle. But then, as if the fates themselves conspired to unveil the next piece, an unexpected breakthrough arrived. An informant, someone who had worked with Petiot during the war, came forward, trembling and desperate for protection. Masu met the man in a dimly lit alley, the shadows swallowing them whole. The informant was barely coherent, his eyes wide with fear. He spoke in hushed tones, as though the walls themselves might be listening. "I was one of them," the informant whispered. "I was a part of his network. Petiot, he wasn't just killing people for money. He believed he was cleansing the world. He spoke about purity, about creating a new world order where only the strong would survive." The words hit Masu like a blow to the chest. Petiot wasn't just a lone madman. He was part of something much larger, something connected to the most terrifying elements of the war. The informant continued. "After the war ended, I thought it was over. But Petiot's vision didn't die. There are others, people who still follow him. They want to finish what he started." Masu's mind raced. Could Petiot's ideology have survived his capture? Were there still followers out there hiding in plain sight? The idea that Petiot's twisted beliefs had a larger, more dangerous network behind them made the hairs on the back of Masu's neck stand on end. Suddenly, the informant's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I don't know everything, but there's a man. I think he's the one who's taken charge of Petiot's work. They call him Le Maître. He's more dangerous than Petiot ever was." Masu's heart sank. The mention of Le Maître sent a chill through him. It was the first time the name had come up in any investigation, and the informant's fear was palpable. Le Maître, the master, was a shadow, an enigma in the underworld. Who was he? What had Petiot started that was so monumental it needed to continue? The informant leaned in closer, his eyes darting nervously around the alley. "He's still out there. I don't know where. But I know one thing. He's planning something. Something big. If you want to stop this, you need to find him first." Masu nodded, his mind whirring with possibilities. Was Le Maître the key to unraveling this web of violence? Or was he just another part of the poison that had begun with Petiot? Days passed, and Massu's investigation grew more urgent. He combed through every lead, traced every connection, but nothing gave him the answers he needed. The network Petiot had built, if it still existed, was far too elusive. Massu's frustration grew. The more he learned about Petiot's twisted ideology, the more it became clear that this was no ordinary case. He was up against a dangerous ideology, one that could destroy everything if it were allowed to grow. But then, just as Massu was beginning to think he had reached another dead end, he received a cryptic message. A letter slid under his door in the dead of night. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. I know who you are looking for. I know where you are going. Don't follow me. You have no idea what you're about to uncover. Leave it alone, or you'll be next. The words were chilling, but the implication was even worse. Someone knew Massu's every move. Someone was watching him. The letter wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Massu's pulse quickened. Who was behind this? Who had sent the message? Was it Lemaitre himself? Or was it someone even more dangerous? With no time to lose, Massu gathered his team and prepared for what would surely be the most perilous mission of his career. If they didn't find Lemaitre soon, he feared the consequences would be far more catastrophic than they could ever imagine. As the team headed to the location hinted at in the letter, Massu's thoughts raced. The stakes had never been higher, and the shadows around them grew darker with each step they took. The night air was thick with tension. Something was coming. Something Massu wasn't ready for. But as they neared their destination, Massu caught a glimpse of something, or someone, moving in the shadows ahead. Was it him? Massu's heart pounded as he stepped forward, his footsteps echoing through the narrow alley. He could see something, or someone, moving just ahead, a shadow that seemed to flicker and vanish into the darkness. Every instinct screamed at him to halt, to retreat, but he pushed forward. They had come this far. Too far to turn back now. The team was close behind him, moving cautiously, but even they couldn't suppress the unease that hung in the air. There was no denying it now. Something was wrong. The trail had led them here, to this desolate street corner, to an old building shrouded in mystery. The letter, the cryptic warnings, it all pointed to this moment. But who was waiting for them? Massu's breath hitched as he saw the silhouette again, this time closer. The figure, tall and cloaked, moved with purpose, gliding silently through the night. Then, with a flash of motion, the figure stepped into the light. Massu's eyes widened as recognition hit him like a thunderclap. It wasn't Lemaitre. It wasn't anyone he'd seen before. The man standing before him wasn't a stranger at all. It was someone he had long thought to be dead. The face was older, worn by time, but the piercing eyes, those eyes Massu had never forgotten, were unmistakable. It was a face he had seen only in photographs, a face connected to the very heart of the horror they had been chasing. The face of a man who had vanished during the war, presumed lost to history. And now, standing before Massu, was the shocking truth. Dr. Marcel Petiot's accomplice. The air was thick with tension. The man's lips curled into a smile, a cold, calculating expression. "I was wondering when you'd find me," he said, his voice low and menacing. Massu's pulse quickened, his mind racing. The pieces were finally falling into place, but it was a revelation that horrified him. Petiot, it seemed, had not been working alone after all. The network, the sinister ideology, it hadn't died with his capture. It had lived on, thriving in the shadows, growing like a cancer in the underworld. And now, Massu had found its most dangerous player yet. The man stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with a dark promise. "You think Petiot was the mastermind? He was nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game. And now, you're about to become part of it." Before Massu could react, the figure moved swiftly, drawing something from his coat. A gun. The sharp click of the safety being disengaged sent a jolt of fear through Massu's chest. His team was still behind him, their eyes locked on the situation, but it was clear they were outmatched. They were dealing with someone who knew how to manipulate fear, to control the game. But Massu wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when he had come so far. "You're too late," the man continued, his voice dripping with contempt. Petiot's vision is far from finished. We'll cleanse this world of the weak, just as he promised. You've only scratched the surface of what's to come. There's more, much more. Massu's mind raced. The next phase, Petiot had written about in his journals. This wasn't just a few rogue individuals continuing the killings. This was a plan, an ideology, spreading far beyond the doctor's twisted notions. And now, this accomplice, the mastermind behind Petiot's true legacy, was about to make sure that plan would never be stopped. A shot rang out, but it wasn't directed at Massu. It was a warning shot, fired into the air. In an instant, another figure emerged from the darkness, tall and poised, Le Maître, the very man they had been searching for, the one who had orchestrated the continuation of Petiot's deadly work. The figure's face was shrouded in shadow, but the unmistakable air of power radiated from him. Massu froze, realizing that the hunt was far from over. Le Maître wasn't just the end of this nightmare. He was the beginning of something far darker. And in that moment, Massu knew that if they didn't act fast, the ideological poison Petiot had started would spread like wildfire, too far, too fast for anyone to stop. The man with the gun turned, giving a slight nod to Le Maître, who stepped forward with an air of authority. "I trust you understand now, Inspector," Le Maître said, his voice rich with malice. "You've been chasing ghosts. We have no intention of stopping." Massu's thoughts whirled. His team was outnumbered, and his gun, hidden under his jacket, was useless against the two men standing before him. But his resolve remained unbroken. The truth was out there, and he would expose it, no matter the cost. With a glance at his team, Massu made a snap decision. He had to get out of there. There was no choice but to regroup, to find another way to stop these men and the network they had built. The lives of many were at stake, and he couldn't afford to fail. As Massu began to back away, the figure with the gun made a sudden move, pointing it directly at the detective. But before anyone could react, a blinding light pierced the darkness, blinding them all. The sound of an approaching vehicle echoed through the alley, and just as quickly as it had appeared, the mysterious figures disappeared into the night. Massu's heart raced as he stood in the middle of the alley, his mind spinning with confusion and fear. Le Maître had vanished. His accomplice was gone. And for a moment, Massu had no idea where to turn next. But one thing was certain: Petiot's legacy, his deadly vision, was far from over. And Massu would stop at nothing to ensure that the darkness he had uncovered would not consume everything in its path.